We have all experienced this recently. You are trying to resolve a billing issue in a chat window, reading a polished product review, or looking at a striking photo on your feed, and you pause to ask yourself, am I actually interacting with a human being? This constant second-guessing does something corrosive over time. When you cannot verify the origin of a voice, a text, or an image, your baseline trust in the digital environment starts to fracture. The distinction between human and machine output is no longer something you can reliably make with the naked eye. The technical markers of artificiality are becoming invisible to the average user. When this confusion happens at scale, it opens the door to widespread manipulation. If we cannot identify what is trying to persuade or inform us, we lose the ability to make informed choices. This is why individual skepticism is no longer enough. It requires a structural change in how these tools present themselves. Enter the European Union's Regulation 2024/1689, known as the AI Act. Specifically, Chapter 17 of the regulation, which governs limited-risk AI systems. In the logic of the regulation, a limited-risk system sits safely below the heavily restricted high-risk categories. But limited risk does not mean a free pass. It triggers a singular, absolute requirement: transparency. The law dictates that a machine must introduce itself. What we used to consider basic conversational politeness is now a strict legal obligation. Article 50 does not ban these systems from generating content or chatting with users. It simply forces them to drop their disguises to protect the agency of the person on the other side of the screen. Paragraph 5 of Article 50 establishes a clear timeline for this disclosure. The information must be provided clearly and recognizably at the absolute latest possible moment, your very first interaction or exposure. This rule immediately targets the most common daily encounter, the conversational agent. Providers must design interactive systems so users are explicitly informed they're dealing with an AI. But the law includes a carve-out. The explicit warning isn't required if the AI's artificial nature is overwhelmingly obvious given the specific context. The goal is clear. Humans should never unknowingly invest social trust, patience, or emotional weight into a script of code. Then the regulation addresses generative AI, the systems that output synthetic text, audio, images, or video. Paragraph 2 places the burden on the developers. Providers must ensure their synthetic outputs carry a machine-readable mark indicating the media was generated or manipulated by an AI. Paragraph 4 shifts focus to the people sharing the content. If a deployer publishes a deepfake or manipulated media regarding a matter of public interest, they are required to publicly and clearly disclose its artificial origin. The regulation balances this against free expression. The first major exception applies to works that are manifestly artistic or satirical. Here, the transparency requirement is deliberately limited. You must acknowledge the AI's involvement, but without ruining the aesthetic. The second exception protects serious journalism and texts published to inform the public. The disclosure obligation falls away entirely if the content undergoes strict human editorial review, with a real person assuming responsibility. The AI Act targets algorithmic deception directly, leaving room for human expression and a free press to operate without cumbersome warning labels on every paragraph. Finally, the regulation addresses passive observation. Paragraph 3 applies even when you are entirely passive, simply walking through a space or sitting at a desk. Deployers who operate emotion recognition or biometric categorization systems are required to actively inform the people being exposed to that system's operation. Invisible algorithmic observation is legally unacceptable. If a machine reads your facial expressions or catalogs your physical traits, it must notify you of its presence. Looking at Chapter 17 as a whole, the strategy is consistent. AI systems are free to converse, generate art, and observe environments, provided they do so entirely in the light. Because the AI Act applies to any system whose outputs reach European users, these rules carry global weight. They establish a rigorous, unavoidable baseline standard for technology companies worldwide. Compliance is no longer an afterthought. Politeness and identification must be baked directly into the foundational code of the models. This doesn't eliminate the complexities of living alongside artificial intelligence, but it establishes a baseline of honesty. It ensures that when a machine speaks or generates content, you have the information necessary to decide how much weight that machine's output actually carries.